Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick axslav ranish, as we explore tactics and strategies used in the game of Starcraft 2. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of games from yesterday's Group E of the round of 32 of the WCS America Premier League. These games we're going to look at are going to be Minigun vs Nestea, taking a look at the Zerg vs Protoss army compositions. Then we're going to take a look at Phoenix vs Apocalypse in a TVT mech vs bio situation. Then we're going to take a look at harassment-focused Terran vs Protoss and Apocalypse vs Minigun. And of course, after these three segments, the fourth segment is going to be the viewer Q&A. So if you have any questions, send it to me at axslav on Twitter or the YouTube comments on youtube.com/official MLGSC2. Find any of the recent Rule of Engagement videos. Post your questions and YouTube comment in those videos, and I'll answer them in the next episode, of course. If I miss any of your questions, don't worry. I'll catch them in the next episode. It's sometimes hard to catch them all in the short breaks. So moving on to the first section, it's going to be Zerg vs Protoss army compositions. We're going to start off talking about Protoss vs Zerg fast thirds, and a couple things to keep in mind when you want to play such a style. Then risky army compositions, and which ones are, and some things to think about if you're going to go for a risky army composition. Then also some key strengths for Zerg in the late game. So we're going to start off this replay here at the 4-minute mark. And one thing we noticed is there's a hatchery in the Protoss Natural, and this is an opening Zerg sometimes do. It's actually a pretty strong opening. It used to be very popular. Zerg goes hatch first in their opponent's Natural, of course, delaying their own expansion, but they're delaying the Protoss expansion as well. And it ends up being fairly even most of the time. Now, if they can get a queen out and put a creep tumor down, then the Zerg usually gets pretty far ahead. But that usually won't happen. Protoss can usually either kill the hatchery before the queen gets out, or kill the creep tumor before it finishes. And it's going to even out pretty much even. You can see here, you know, the Zerg has their hatchery halfway done, but Protoss is working on their attack. Their Nexus is soon to go down as well. A few Zerglings, they're going to get one probe, but not too much damage, considering he actually built 6 Zerglings there at that proxy hatch. So going forward, the next one to talk about is as a Protoss, right? I mean, maybe the OP was a little bit weird, but the general idea is on a map like Acheron Waste, on a map like Daybreak, or even on any map if it's a style you like, taking a fast third is not a bad option in Protoss vs Zerg. And one of the key things, if you want to take a very fast third off of just a single gateway production, right? What you want to do is you want to apply pressure with your Mothership Core and a couple gateway units. And not only will this force the Zerg to stay back at home, but also one of the things the Zerg wants to do versus a Protoss fast third is say, okay, they're making a lot of probes, I should make nothing but drones. But this type of pressure forces the Zerg to make all those Zerglings instead of going pure drones. You can even usually get a queen kill if you combine a couple gateway unit hits with that Mothership Core to get that queen kill. And that'll hurt their economy as well because they'll miss an inject, of course, not having that queen to be able to throw that inject down. So it's a great way to both keep the Zerg on the defensive until you can get this wall set up that makes your third safe from Zerglings, as well as just prevent the Zerg from being super greedy in the early game as you take that third base. So going forward here, of course, Nestea does know exactly what's going on. His overlord has seen there was a fast third from Minigun's perspective. He knows that Minigun's already got the third up. He's got the wall. He's going to be in good shape. Now, the next thing about the fast third is very important to constantly use these hallucination scouts because you're delaying your robotics, your Stargate, you're delaying your other forms of tech because you want to get that third so fast. So make sure to use hallucinations. You want to get a couple sentries early, at least 4 or 5, if you're taking a fast third, because you need those force fields in case the Zerg tries to be aggressive. So why not use some of that energy to use hallucinations to find out what the Zerg's doing, and then you can know how to appropriately counter it. If you see mass roaches, crank out Immortals with Chrono Boost while making additional sentries and Stalkers, maybe additional cannons. If, like Minigun did, you see a Spire with nothing else, there's no Evo Chambers, no Roach Warren, no Hydra to stand, just a Spire, they could go Mass Muta, and so Double Stargate is a great response. And if Nestea chose to go Mass Mutas, those 12 Mutas right here, then of course the Phoenixes he'd have like 6 Phoenixes by the time he does across the map, and Minigun would be almost have a free win. So that actually brings me back to the point. We're going to rewind this just a few minutes here. And the next point I want to talk about is from Nestea's point of view. If you're going to go for risky composition, like Nestea, for example, he wants to go pure Mutalist is his goal with this build. But pure Mutalist is a risky composition because it has a potential to be hard countered, right? Any unit combination has a potential to be hard countered is a risky unit combination. And It's not necessarily that you can't do that. Mutalisks are great, but what you want to do is you want to make sure you know exactly what the opponent's doing so you don't walk into somebody who's countering your build, which is exactly why all these resources from Nestea, they're not being spent. He's waiting because he hasn't seen what his opponent's doing yet. He wants to confirm, and then lo and behold, he sees double Stargate. He doesn't want to invest into a whole lot of Mutalisks when he knows his opponent is going to have a lot of Phoenix early on in the game. So, and Mutalisks isn't the only example, right? If you're a Terran player, and let's say you want to make like pure Siege Tank or something, you want to make sure the Protoss isn't going heavy Mortal. If you're a Protoss player and you want to crank out, let's say, a whole lot of high Templar charge lots against a Zerg, that's great if they're trying to go like speed lean Mutalisk, speed lean and faster. If they're massing roaches and you went charge lot Templar or charge lot Archon, you're gonna get destroyed. So that's another example. If you're doing a composition that has the potential to be hard countered, you have to be very, very careful. Make sure you know what your opponent's doing. Make sure you play like Nestea, scout your opponent so you know for sure what they're doing and you don't walk into a hard counter by making Mutalisks against Phoenixes. Much better have those Corruptors in this case. And then, of course, he's actually going to tech to add other units, more drones. That's basically what he's doing. He's just making drones. So, going forward in this game, both players are going to macro up pretty aggressively, right? We can see here, Minigun, you know, it's only on 3 bases versus Zerg 5, but 3 bases is still fine. He's still got a great economy, and he's got a lot of good tech. He's going very expensive units army-wise, Void Rays and Colossi, both very, if you combine them, it's a very, very strong late-game army. Whereas Nestea, yes, he's got better economy, but his upgrades are a little bit behind, and he doesn't really have an army right now. If you look at army value, Nestea's army is actually almost all Corruptors. So Minigun's army is stronger than Nestea's, and Nestea's army is actually much weaker than it looks by the army value tab, because so much of that value is in Corruptors, which Corruptors are not cost-efficient units. They're actually typically inflate your value because they cost more than they're really worth in pretty much almost any situation. It's not like they're bad to get. It's just that's the way they are. They're balanced. They're balanced to be more expensive than they're worth because they're so easy to mass due to the larva mechanic of Zerg. And that's what brings me to the next point I want to talk about. Is one of Zerg's key late game strengths. So as a Zerg in a late game, you may not have the greatest army. You may not have the greatest upgrades. But one thing is you should be a base ahead, right? You should be on 5 bases to maybe your opponent's 4. And then you should have a lot of extra resources on top of your opponent banked up. And that brings you into this position right here, right? What is the situation Nestea is? And we're actually going to bring up a little graphic. Nestea has an army disadvantage, but he has a lot of money banked up. And being Zerg, one of your key advantages in the late game is that if you lose your army, you can reproduce it with anything, right? Larva can turn into anything, assuming you have the techs up, which by the late game you will. This is why it's a late game Zerg strength, is that once you have those techs up, once you have money in the bank, you can make any army composition you want, right? If a Terran has mostly gateways, they can't remax their army in all battle cruisers. They just can't do it, right? Because barracks can only make a limited amount of units. Same thing with Protoss, right? The gateways make certain units, the robotics facility makes other ones, the Stargates make other ones, so you're limited in what you can produce by your production facilities. Zerg doesn't have that limitation. That's Zerg's key late game strength. So the first step for Zerg in the late game, figure out how to trade your army off, right? And we're in a situation here where his targets, right? He's looking at these 2 bases. As a Zerg player, those are the 2 vulnerable bases of Protoss when they're on the 4 bases. And so what he wants to do is he wants to find a way to trade off his army. And his army, so what he does is, does he send his army over here? Or over here? No. Why are these 2 options very poor? It's because it's this simple. The Protoss opponent, right? If the Protoss opponent sees the Zerg down here, they just move their army, of course, down here, and they'll block it. If they see the Zerg move their army down here, they move their army up here, and they block it. Either way, they can defend. The proper way to try to find a way to trade off your army, if it's vastly inferior, you just have Corruptors and Banelings against Colossi, Air Units, and Sentries. What you want to do is you want to use a tactic used throughout, you know, millennia of warfare, actually. It's called the indirect approach. So they're actually going to erase some of this stuff here real quick. The indirect approach, go back to red, is the idea that you have multiple targets and you approach them in a way that it's not clear what's your intended target. And that's exactly what we see Nestea doing. He puts his army right here. right? It comes in right here. And from, or actually, it's really like back here. But the whole idea is, with his army there, whichever of these locations the Protoss defends, if the Protoss defends here, he goes here. If the Protoss defends here, he goes here. So he has 2 targets to attack, right? 2 targets to attack. The Protoss can't defend both unless they split up their army. If the Protoss splits up the army, then the Zerg can engage cost efficiently. If the Protoss doesn't split up their army, then the Zerg can pick whichever base to want to attack. Now, of course, the counter to this is trying to control more of the map so you don't get it in this position, but it's a very important tactical concept to know, the indirect approach. And so we're going to see that's exactly what Nestea does. The first step of the Zerg late game strength, find a way to trade your army off efficiently, right? So we see that here with he has his units right in the middle. He can attack to the right, but the army's to the right. He needs to attack straight down, right? And the Protoss can't be both places. For the Protoss to walk between, it takes a longer time. And so he's going to come in here. Let's check the right. Okay, there's army there. All right. Let's not mess with that. Let's go down. And he heads straight down here. Not in a very efficient trade, right? This is a poor trade for Nestea. And even you could definitely arguably say this is a win for Minigun, right? Yes, he loses the Nexus, but units lost tab is very heavy in favor of Minigun. But Nestea wasn't going to do better there, right? Nestea was basically giving me a situation. We're going to pause right here. Nestea was in a situation at this point where his army was useless because he overmade Corruptors and he made a whole bunch of Banines without having the correct support for them, right? He didn't have Overlord drops. He didn't have Ultralists to clear the force field, so they had no chance of ever combating the force fields of Minigun's army. So he had to try to find something to do with that army so he could remake a better one. But this is where you really get to the true Zerg late game strength. This is what determines the game. Is Zerg can remake anything. We see Nestea in the production tab, 36 Mutalisks being produced here, right? A lot of Mutalisks being built here. And understanding this as a Zerg is what allows you to win. He sees the Protoss army. He's already seen it, right? He says, okay, it's mostly, the power of it is Void Ray Colossi. Well, against Colossi, Vipers can be good, Infestors can be good, and Queens can be actually okay, and Mutalisks are good. But, you know, Corruptors are good against Colossi, they're bad against Void Rays. Let's not make them, right? Infestors, sorry, they're not that good. I meant Vipers, excuse me. Vipers, good against Colossi, not so great against the Phoenixes or the Blinkstalkers. I mean, they're not good on their own against Colossi anyway. So maybe, you know, Vipers could be good, that a few, but not going to be the bulk of your army anyway. In fact, maybe I actually should have gone a couple of Vipers with that Mutaflock. I don't know. And then, of course, the other one that would be good against Colossi, the Queens. Not very mobile in a straight-on fight with the ground support. Not really the true answer to Colossi. So going Mutalisk, because that's the counter to this composition, is overwhelming the Protoss and Mutalisk. Now, as a Protoss player, what's super important is to understand that Zerg players can do this. And in the late game, if you crush a Zerg army, you have to be insanely diligent with scouting your opponent to immediately try to figure out what they're doing. So, you know, sometimes it's good to counter, but immediately you just got to scout like mad if you know they have a lot of resources banked up and you're not sure what they're going to spend them on. And we can see here, from this point of view, Minigun goes on the attack, but Minigun doesn't have that kind of information quite available. You know, maybe the Phoenixes should have gone around to scout. It's so hard, though, especially in a tournament game like this. You know, you're like, I'm going to beat, you know, Nestea, right? I just crushed his army, going to beat one of the greatest players. Not until right now, he sees the Mutalisks. And, you know, even a 15-second heads up would have been great, because 15 seconds is like one more Phoenix, right? They each take 35, you can produce 2. You'd have the 2 Phoenix halfway done. You can start the range upgrade on the Phoenix. But from this position, it's very difficult, because we're in a situation where he's got a big army and they can take the Mutalisks on straight up, but he has no Blink Tech. He only has 6 Phoenix, which ideally you want about, you know, like 15 versus, theoretically. And then also he has no Phoenix range, and he has no air upgrades, right? And then so from here on, the Mutalisks just run around and just kill everything, because there's nothing that can deal with him, right? The Stalkers can't keep pace. There's not enough Phoenixes to take him on individually. In fact, down is down to 3. And Nestea finishes out this game with some great Mutalisk play. So what really determined the game there was the fact that he tech switched into a unit that hard countered Minigun's competition, combined with the fact that Minigun wasn't prepared for such a tech switch. Knowing a tech switch is viable as a Protoss, if you're going a lot of sky toss units like Minigun was, what you need to do is you need to get a lot of air upgrades so you're ready, at least by this point in the game. But if it's been a very passive game by 20-minute mark, get a couple air upgrades. So you can re-max your air very quickly, add in a couple Stargates once you max out, so you can re-pop that if you need to. Or, if you're not going hardcore Sky Toss, like Minigun is kind of going half-half, make sure you have Storm available. Storm is a catch-all Protoss thing. It's not a hard counter to Mutalist. In Heart of the Storm, meet with Muta Micro and Regen, they can work with it, but it's something that means you won't lose the game against Muta Harass if your opponent hardcore tech switches into those Mutas. So, really important. A recap on what decided this game. Nestea, he didn't commit to Mutas early until he scouted his opponent. If he did, he would have died because Phoenixes versus Mutas early on. The Phoenix will beat the Mutas. So very, very smart. If you're going to go for risky tech composition, make sure to scout your opponent so you're not running yourself into a hard counter. And then, of course, in the late game, as a Zerg player, Nestea, he knew he couldn't beat the army. He found a way to trade, okay, basically get some value for losing all his guys, and then quickly remax with an army that would hard counter the army of Minigun. And of course, that's pretty much exactly what decided this game. This wraps up analysis of this first game. Take a short break and be right on to segment number 2.